Welcome back to Serious Talk, Agentic AI, the show for business leaders and technical teams trying to turn AI ambition into real operational outcomes. I'm Greg Banks, and today we're tackling a topic that shows up fast on every serious AI initiative: token stewardship, how you control operational costs, avoid throttling, and keeping your agents efficient as usage scales. The news cycle is moving so quickly that cost and model assumptions can change in weeks, not years. And if you're not watching it, it can quietly blow up your budget. I'm joined again today by Tim and Gavin. Thanks to both of you for bringing the research and the real-world lessons from how we're using agents internally. And to you listening, thanks for spending time with us. If you're building agents, rolling out AI tools across your teams, or even just trying to understand why usage limits and bills spike, this one's for you. Let's get into it. All right, welcome back to Serious Talk Agentic AI. Tim, Gavin, good to have you guys back here today.
Yeah, good to be here. Can't wait for it.
Yeah, great to be back.
Man, the news cycle is fast. It's been really exciting to hear what you guys, as we lay out the agenda for these series and what we're going to talk about, and the research that goes into it. We're not just learning it to do a podcast. We're learning it because we're using the agents internally. But we're going to dig into today's topic. We're going to be talking about token stewardship, right? Getting into some of the operational costs on the side of bringing agents in, regardless if it's the local versus cloud hosted, whatever. You need to have these questions in the back of your mind, and you need to keep an eye on them, right? Tim has said this at least 6 times in this series: nothing new under the sun. I'm reflecting back to the 80s and 90s, early 2000, a lot of on-prem solutions. You had to look at hardware cost. You had to look at software license cost. How many users? What problem are we trying to solve? What's the value of that problem? And am I spending more to fix it than the problem itself is, right? That problem has transcended through SaaS, right? It's continued to be a thing as software costs change, licensing models change. I would say the biggest difference as we look to AI is what you used to could do on an annual or maybe every 2 to 3 year review. You better do it every 30 days now, or at least every 60, because literally the news cycle will dictate your model change right out from under you. So a lot of interesting stuff here. I will say this is one you definitely want to download the artifact, because there's a lot of facts in this. Gavin did a lot of research to pull this together. But Tim, why don't you kind of start by defining some of the language here in token stewardship? I think most people might know what that is, but let's make sure we get that right before we dig in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is going to be a topic that's just highly relevant to all business leaders, whether you're implementing technical solutions or you're just operating day to day, because AI is going to be a big part of our day-to-day operations across the board. And I think this really applies to if you're using custom AI agents that were built for your company, or whether you're just using Claude Code or Claude Cowork or Codex or any of the large AI lab applications, because token usage is getting just more and more critical as GPU space gets constrained over time, as AI usage continues to explode. Companies are just getting more and more tighter around, if it's a per seat model, and we'll go over the different models later. If it's a per seat model, what are the limits for that? Making sure that if you're on a usage-based model right now, the costs aren't necessarily going down for API usage. And so with anything with business, right, it's all about what is the value we're producing versus the costs to provide that value. And so if you're going and 10xing your productivity, but you're also 10xing your cost, what's the business walking away with there? And it's a legitimate concern. There's actually reports out of certain companies. I think like Meta published recently, they're doing token maxing competitions of how, which employees are using the most tokens to drive success. And there's individuals that are using more spend in AI tokens than their base salary for the year. That's a pretty significant chunk. Now, if they're providing, the requisite value for that too, could be the best investment ever, but it could not be as well. So again, I think every company has to understand token optimization moving forward, because it's all going to go to the bottom line. What is the value and the top line revenue you're bringing in versus the bottom line and the cost going out? And AI token costs is going to be a big piece of that balance sheet for a lot of companies moving forward. So I think highly relevant topic, and something that's just garnering more and more attention by the week. So yeah, really excited to dive in. And I think kind of the flow we'll take today, we'll look at like what's the basic token flow architecture. So what actually comprises token usage when you're working with a large language model or an agent? what are some, basic primitives or first principles about being a good steward of tokens? And then we'll talk about optimization tiers. So what are kind of the main levers you have, whether you're doing AI agents or just using AI applications that you're paying for? What are the main levers that you have to actually get more efficient or to optimize? And then, like always, we'll kind of wrap up with a bottom line of so what at the end of what you can walk away with. But yeah, let's start with token flow architecture. Gavin, what's the general makeup of how tokens are used in the typical agent system?
Yeah, before I jump into that, I just want to say, harking back to the analogy that I keep using, that this is almost a reinvention of coding in a sense. This reminds me so much of algorithm optimization when it comes to creating new systems, right? So just kind of progressing into the next stage of development. So when we talk about how establishing a baseline for what tokens are and how they get utilized, what comprises the tokens and how can you optimize it, it's going to harken back to a couple different things we've already discussed. So if we recall back what makes an agent, what are the inputs of the agent, all of those things are going to also increase your token usage. So right up front, a small portion of your token usage is usually going to come from the user input, the interaction with the agent, whether it's the agent or Claude Code or whatever it is you're interacting with that's token based. Then you have your system prompt. So that's anything, like we said, that is core instructions to whatever it is being accomplished. And go ahead.
I was just going to say with that too, we probably should take a step back. And for a lot of people, they hear tokens like, what is a token? And I'll just maybe cover that really quick. It puts more context. Like a token has kind of become the basic unit of measurement for AI usage across the board, regardless of time. Typically, one token equals 4 characters or about 3/4 of a word. About 100 tokens is about 75 words. It's just a measurement, like an index measurement that AI companies can use to kind of roughly determine the input and the output or the usage in terms of what you're doing with AI, right? And so just kind of wanted to set the tone there for maybe some people that are fuzzy on what a token actually is.
Yep. And it all cycles back to energy, right? How much energy are they going to have to run in order to process your prompt? So this is their way of doing that. So we talked a little bit about the prompts, the input. You're going to have memory if you have memory tied into your agent, your conversation history. How much tokens does conversation history use? Well, it depends on how long your conversation has been with the agent. So that's going to continuously grow. Then you have your tool definitions. How many tools does your agent have access to, or whatever process you're working with? And then, of course, it's going to have tool calls utilizing those tools and the response that it generates. So all of this feeds into total token usage, and you can see it really starts to add up, which is why this goes back to the last podcast episode we had, which was about skill tiering and how do we roll out skills to a company? How do we monitor them? Kind of the Wild West on skills that you can create, the Claude Code agents that you can create. So you want to make sure that you're optimizing token usage, and it goes all the way back to narrowing context windows as small as possible for your agents and your tools. That way you're not going and hitting APIs and making things really expensive for you.
I think a common term that's thrown around a lot now, and I think it's only going to become more common as people think about this, is progressive disclosure. Right? So progressively disclosing to the large language model the information it needs, only unpacking and bringing in more context, more characters, more words into context when you need it. And so, having this, that's why skills, just as a way as it's designed, you can go listen to those episodes as well. Why they work so well is it can progressively disclose context on how to do things to the large language model without just pulling everything in. A lot of times when it comes to token management, less is more, for sure. Less is more in terms of getting the results.
This even goes all the way back to when we talked about prompts.
Mm-hmm.
I know I find myself writing prompts all the time, and I'll say, come back with a 200 character or less answer. And I'm not saying it to save tokens. I'm saying it because I don't need 3 essays back. But if it's in AI's benefit, if it's in that provider's benefit that it spits out 5,000 characters, what do you think it's going to default to? So yeah, there's just needs to be a lot of intent at every layer of the development process. So
Yep, 100%. And so yeah, I mean, those are kind of some of the main building blocks of the token architecture, but shifting to kind of some of the key principles to keep in mind in terms of being a steward, a good steward, or optimizing tokens. What are some of the core principles that business leaders and business users need to keep in mind?
Well, I think the important thing to know is it doesn't matter what type of type of interaction you're having with an LLM. If you are interacting with the LLM, it's going to be based off of tokens. This is happening in every subscription model, every usage-based model. Clearly, like by the book, that's what usage is defined as. So this is something you need to be on top of pretty much with every interaction you have with AI. You could even utilize this in interacting with just the web versions of ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, understanding how can I tailor what I'm asking for in a way that's not going to, burn a ton of tokens. That's even at a core level.
Yep.
The
Well,
second,
I was just going to say that's a huge piece. A lot of people ask, like, so what? Why should I care? Well, this is why you should care. If you're on a API usage model and you're not optimizing tokens, you're just going to have a lot of money going out the door really, really quick. Individual users using thousands of dollars a month for tokens. If you're on a subscription seat model, even if you're on a pretty premium subscription with like OpenAI or Anthropic, for example, if you start having runaway token usage because you've designed, tons of skills, you're bringing everything into context all the time, you're doing unnecessary turns, your user's just going to get throttled every hour or every day. And so then that's just going to be time you're not being productive. I mean, real life story in our own company, we had somebody come on who's just been like one of the primary drivers of uncovering new ways to leverage the AI tools, but he was hitting his limits almost every hour. So he's having to stop and pause or shift over to our other subscription that we have because we have OpenAI and Anthropic right now internally, and he had to have to use that one. So you're losing productivity compared to people that are just able to that are being stewards of the tokens and keeping that productivity moving. And so the result is you're going to have stops and starts to kind of being able to produce, outputs there. So there's real ramifications on whether you're on a seat model or a usage model, either way. So it's absolutely something you got to do. And then, yeah, this individual went and did a kind of an analysis of their token usage with the skills, optimized it, and then found that he was actually able to output more without hitting throttling during the entire workday, just by doing a little bit of analysis and a little bit of optimization with some of the 4 levers that we're talking about later here. So it actually works and pays off.
And that's where the next layer to this comes into fruition, right? Because you were telling the story earlier, you've heard people, their entire salaries are being multiplied by the API usage. So now it's how do we reduce that portion? How do we make you equally efficient? So you're talking about skill usage, you're talking about AI usage. It's important, I would say the tagline here is it's not just about capability, it's also about efficiency.
Yep, 100%. So, okay, we know kind of what the main pieces to how tokens fit in architecture. We know kind of some of the key principles to keep in mind, but okay, how do we actually optimize token usage? What are some of the levers we actually have? When we kind of look at this is great, what do we actually do with it? What are the key things that people have at their fingertips?
Yeah, so kind of starting from simplest things all the way to the most difficult things, right? So you can optimize your prompt and context, right? So that's the starting point is, are we using too many tokens because we're providing too many things? The second tier is the caching capabilities that a lot of LLMs have. Can we design our prompts and our usage in such a way that it's so repetitive that we can cache a lot of the words and what we're using into the AI? Most LLMs have some sort of prompt caching capability, and it can be quite a lifesaver when it comes to token usage. The third tier is tiered LLM routing. There's tons of different LLMs available. Regardless of what provider you're using, they're going to have various different LLMs that you can choose from. So the question becomes, which one do I really need? Because some of them are cheaper. So tokens aren't always, one token does not equal another, right? So a token on one model is going to be cheaper than a token on a newer model.
That's usually based on the reasoning capability, like how good is that actual model, right? So if it's a complex task, you probably want a higher model versus a lower one, right?
And the last tier, which is what I would consider the nuclear option, it has a ton of trade-offs. So definitely something that we're going to dive into a little more deeper, but self-hosting LLMs, right? Completely get rid of tokenization of all of your interactions with just hosting the LLM instead of making API calls or needing a subscription.
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, diving into the first one then, prompt and context optimization. This is probably the easiest one just to get immediate wins, just kind of even as an individual on your own. You could probably do this with a lot of the skills if you're working in Claude co-work and you have some of your own skills and scheduled jobs that you're running, et cetera. Anybody could go do some basic optimization here. So what are When we pull back tier 1, right? Prompt and context optimization, what are we looking at here?
Yeah, so for tier 1, I would say it's kind of a double-edged sword. It is both simultaneously the simplest and most complex thing that you can do. You mentioned earlier there's competitions. How do you get the most optimization out of what you're trying to do? That's going to be going on for years. How can we get this AI to be the most optimized, efficient thing? Just like algorithms are continuously developing within the computer science world. So I think you're going to see real quick, easy wins and then long-term difficult wins over the course of many years. And so what does this look like? When you're working with a skill, only give the LLM what it actually needs and don't front load anything. So this is what you were talking about previously with progressive disclosure, right? Let's start with the system prompt. Let's start with the user query. Then let the agent decide, okay, what tools do I need? Let's pull those tools into context and then only load what's relevant. So you're going to start with 0 and make your way up rather than saying, here's everything that I have, go and try and make a decision.
What this looks like in practice, whenever we say progressive disclosure, like a very basic example would be, any agent has like a markdown document that is like its main system prompt. So whether that's a soul.md if it's OpenClaw, or an agents.md if it's OpenAI, or a Claude.md if it's, Anthropic Claude, right? That's the main system prompt telling the agent this is who you are, this is how you should work, or whatever. Then within that system prompt, you could list, here's this, rather than just listing out a full skill, you just have an index. Here's the skills you have with a 1 to 2 sentence description of when to go pull that skill. And here's like the file path to that skill, right? So now the model knows, okay, if it something within this description, so you really want to optimize those descriptions, but it's not going to go pull 500 words or 1,000 words that could describe that skill. It's only going to pull, the 25 words that's describing it. And then if you're using a reasoning model, it's going to reason over that and say, okay, do I need to go to this file path and pull the rest of this skill in, or this reference document in? So breaking out and having links in terms of file paths in anything is a great way to just provide that progressive disclosure, and then being very deliberate about the descriptions that you're using for the skills or the commands or the reference guides, or you name it. You can do progressive disclosure to anything, but it's just unmasking slowly and just slowly peeling back the onion for the model. So it's only peeling back the onion when it needs to.
Exactly. And then to dive a little bit deeper into some of the other aspects, this was something that we ran into when we were building out some custom agents, the concept of memory and how you weigh memory. So this is pretty big when you're dealing with chat agents in particular. So I'm communicating with an agent. You want it to remember everything about what your previous interactions were. But in reality, that's too much context for an agent over time. So you have to have a proper memory algorithm in place to start degrading the values of those memories and eventually slide them out of context. And so this is just a way of saying we're not going to scale exponentially with the amount of interactions that we have with the agent, but rather kind of a sliding window strategy of pulling into context the most recent interactions you've had with the AI.
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, I think just right out of the bat, just with tier 1, pretty straightforward and easy to be able to get 20 to 50% reduction in your token usage just right out of the gate. No extra costs, no extra infrastructure, just results right out of the gate. So lots to be had there. If you're hitting limits, if you're on like a max or a pro plan and you're hitting limits quite a bit with how you're using whatever tool it is, start with tier 1, you can probably get it under control. So then that goes to tier 2, which is prompt caching. So what do we got involved there, Gavin?
Yeah, so with prompt caching, I would say to actually just flipping this on is pretty simple to do. It's optimizing prompt caching that becomes more complex. So all of those things that we just discussed at the beginning of the podcast, which is all the things that input tokens, prompt caching is the ability to say what's going to be the same every single time. So you're able to turn on prompt caching whenever you're sending anything to an LLM, and it's going to typically store it for about 5 minutes. Now, it depends on the LLM provider you're using. We use Claude, so that's a 5-minute window. OpenAI advertises 5 to 10 minutes, but it can vary. So just keep that in mind. So essentially what you're looking here for prompt caching, it's not just the idea of turning it on, but it's recognizing which prompts are really scalable with prompt caching. Is there something that you're sending very often? A really good example of when prompt caching becomes powerful is the idea of ambient agents. So agents that you want to run in small intervals that pull from many different systems or just do some sort of task on a repeatable basis. This is when prompt caching becomes really powerful, because instead of using all those tokens every single time, you use all your tokens once. As long as it continuously runs within that 5-minute window, you're just using a portion of the tokens in between.
Yep, 100%. I was working on a custom agent just this last week, and then I was really trying to monitor token usage with it. And literally, as soon as I applied caching, a prompt caching with it, I immediately dropped my costs by 90% for token costs with that agent. So this is a pretty straightforward one that can yield pretty significant results as well. So again, we're not talking about small shifts here. Like tier 1, you just save 20 to 50% of token usage. Tier 2, you're going to probably save 80 to 90% on token usage. So do the math. That's a significant amount of token usage. That's a lot more uptime or a lot less usage spend already. And you're only two of the 4 levers kind of through what we're walking through here. So then that kind of goes to tier 3. Outside of the nuclear option of the 4 options we're talking about, tier 3 definitely probably the most involved and the most finicky to kind of get right and to engineer correctly. Definitely probably something that's going to be hard if you're not actually, a developer or doing some hands-on technical work or have control over the agent that you're building for your business. But what is tier 3? And how does that even reduce costs more?
Yeah, so tiered LLM routing is essentially at its core the idea of saying not every prompt needs to go to the smartest LLM. So this is not about reducing token usage, but rather making the tokens you do use cheaper. So the idea is if I use a 𝗁𝗁𝗄 over a sonnet, then the tokens that I use at 𝗁𝗁𝗄 are just going to cost less based off of the API billing standards that Claude has. What you typically look to do is say what concepts need a lower model compared to what concepts need a higher model. So for instance, a lower model would be something like maybe there's a small ambient agent that just evaluates context. That's where you would use a lower model. A middle tier model might be for summarization, and then top tier models are more for complex reasoning. So,
and the catch-22 here is actually you'd think, well, every major AI lab kind of has like low reasoning model and then a middle one and then a higher reasoning models. It doesn't matter if it's Anthropic, their low reasoning's 𝗁𝗁𝗄, their middle sonnet, their upper one's Opus. You'd think like, well, if I just run 𝗁𝗁𝗄 all the time, I must be saving tokens, but actually that's not true either. Because if you're doing a high reasoning task that's really difficult and you have an objective output that you're trying to achieve this, a lower reasoning model is just going to spin over and over and over again trying to solve the problem because it's not smart enough to solve it. So it's just going to loop over and over and over again. And yeah, you're spending cheaper tokens, but you're just burning way more turns and loops while it tries to figure it out. Whereas maybe the higher reasoning model, Opus, would just one-shot it, right? And just, go figure it out in one shot. You're spending way more, per token, but, you're having to do way less turns to get it. So again, you really have to match the model, the tier of the model to the difficulty of the problem set it's trying to do. And that's where I said it's kind of a little finicky. Now, I misspoke a little bit earlier. I said this is the finicky and like technical piece to implement. That's if you're trying to do some type of like auto routing or you're trying to have the model dictate at the skill level and determine what's optimized. But if you're just using Claude Cowork or Claude Code or Codex, down on your little menu, there's a caret. You can switch the model manually all the time. And so if you're doing something that's a very straightforward, simple task of like triaging my inbox, that's actually a low reasoning, task. Set that to a lower reasoning model and you're not going to be using as much tokens. So you're not going to be as close to throttling your usage. So manually, yes, anybody can have a role in this too. So I just wanted to kind of call that out as well. But here easily as well, you can cut your token usage by like another 50% plus. Do the math, you saved, 20 to 50%, then you save 90%, then you save 50%. You're saving, a significant multiple of tokens and spend here, which is going to mean more consistent uptime or way lower usage costs across the board. So it definitely matters for the business. So now we go to tier 4, the nuclear option. What's the nuclear option, Gavin?
Yeah, so let's say you don't want to deal with any more of the pesky token calculations, right? So this is the idea of just self-hosting an LLM. Now, this concept deserves its own podcast episode, maybe even a couple in the future. But just at a high level, the real downside to hosting an LLM is the self-hosted LLMs just aren't as powerful, right? So you're not going to be able to see the same capabilities that you would see working with the most recent models Anthropic or OpenAI are releasing. The positive is then you can train the LLM on your own data, things of that nature. So this is definitely a route that some companies are going, especially companies that have really solid data that exists and quite a bit of it. This can be very beneficial. On top of that, you're essentially trading token cost with infrastructure cost. So typically these models need things like consistent running GPUs, lots of memory storage, and those things are only getting more and more expensive as AI becomes more and more prevalent. So this is an option if you want to decide, hey, let's just interact directly with an LLM without having to pay those costs, but you are trading them and there are downsides.
I think the reality of the space, if we just synthesize and just put the bottom line up front for this is, where are local LLMs now? I mean, I think like 𝗁𝗂 just came out from the Google AI labs, and it's very specific to function and tool calling, like low reasoning, high volume types of use cases. And I think that's where local LLMs could provide a lot of potential value. If you've got a high volume, low reasoning level tasks that you could fine tune on your data, so you're getting very consistent decisions and returns on that, it could very well pay off in the long run because you're not paying for all of that usage. But I think the reality is if you think you can use local across the board, even for your higher reasoning type tasks, I think that's where local LLMs just straight up are falling short right now compared to the frontier model. So for a lot of companies, it might make sense to do a mix where, hey, we can move a lot of our heartbeats or our function and tool calling use cases over to a local LLM that's trained on our data that's still doing very well and scoring very well on evals in terms of that aspect. But then, hey, we still will have some type of usage or seat-based subscription to go grab Opus 4.7 or whatever the latest model is at any given point in time for these high reasoning tasks. And it's probably going to be a mix there. But I mean, obviously here, it's a volume game because you're going to have hosting costs, you're going to have training costs. So, but if you've got really high volume usage, again, you just got to do the business value assessment here. This could really make sense for larger enterprises or even, larger mid-market companies that have the technical teams and the hosting infrastructure in place to be able to do this. If it's a lower volume, it's going to be more difficult math to kind of make this viable, but really depends on how much you're using there. So how do we wrap it all up? What are some of the key takeaways, Gavin, that we think people should walk home with?
I think bottom line is the amount that you can be saving as a company just by optimizing your skills. You've got the AI tools, you've got the efficiency gains. How do we then optimize that to reduce cost, to make it more efficient? Your 3 primary things that you're looking into are things like prompt efficiency, caching, and LLM routing. Those are the 3 primary things. With this 4th capability, and none of them are really exclusive, like the 4th capability being self-hosted. So it's not necessarily, hey, I have to do prompt optimization before I do prompt caching. That's not true. And so just explore those options and truly evaluate how you can reduce cost on your LLM usage for your agents and your internal workflows if you're using something like Claude Code or Codex.
Yeah, and I think just from a business leader standpoint, why should you care? I mean, you should care because it's a significant swing in business value between value and costs. Like if it's proven right now that token usage and costs can equal or be more than the base salary of an individual using said tool, but then you can go optimize and get 90% plus savings just through implementing some of the token usage principles that we talked about here, that's pretty significant. If you can cut down 90% of that, that's pretty significant. That opens up your ability to use AI across more of your business to make your people more productive and enable your people. That's absolutely critical. I mean, honestly, this is almost a bigger thing to keep in mind than even what model you go with or what tool, because the difference in performance between a lot of the top AI labs tooling on any eval set is like 5 to 10%. Like, it's only a 10% gap between like the 10th best large language model and like the best large language model. But, in terms of performance, but then when it comes to actual costs, you've got a 90% swing just in terms of how you optimize for your token usage. So yeah, I mean, in terms of where you kind of put some time into understand, I'd say this is towards the top of the heap there. And definitely something you should keep in mind. So it's something that, I think is just going to become more and more common knowledge as AI becomes proliferated more through businesses.
As somebody who spent a good bit of his career doing engineer design work, this drives me crazy, because you just don't know on the front end what all your agent's going to do. You're not going to know what any given agent's capable of, or any given LLM. So as those features come, what you want to get from it comes, and it'd be really, really easy just to put your foot on the pedal and take off and do a ton. To me, one of the takeaways I try to think about a company that's 50 people versus 500 versus 10,000, right? To me, what this says is the operational cost of this is significant enough. If you have a high investment and a high usage, you could almost justify an FTE just to keep an eye on this, and they would pay for their salary, right? Savings might pay for the cost of a person just to keep an eye on this for you, because the people who are really ideating, really trying to keep up with YouTube, right? Keeping an eye on what all the latest things are and what all can we get out of it. You want those minds doing that, but there's enough standards here and enough examples in how you break this down that somebody who did nothing but that could easily pay for themselves just in savings, depending on how you looked at it. But guys, this is again, I can't say it strongly enough. This is one you definitely want to download the artifact, because there's a lot of meat in here that we didn't necessarily get into every line by line of stuff that was pulled together. But the tool is only as good as the value it's bringing you, and we kind of set this episode up talking about that. I hope this is hitting home with some people. If you're somebody out here listening to this episode, and you probably have become aware of this, because if your consumption model shot up, so did your bill. So you've probably seen that, but you may not know what to do with it or have time to read up on it. So I think this is a good one that's going to strike with a lot of folks. If you have questions, if you're taking the things we've talked about with prompts and context and all the things getting up until this point, and you're just getting a little bit overwhelmed, good news for you. We'll have our email address in the show notes. Reach out to us. We'd love to sit down and talk to you about it. Tim, Gavin, thank you guys for taking the time on this artifact, because it helped me understand it too. But at the same time, I think this is something a lot of companies can use to go back and have hard, important conversations with their companies.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you. Have
Thanks
a good
for
one.
having us.
Y'all have a good one. Take care. That wraps today's episode on token stewardship. And if there's one takeaway, it's this: agentic capability is only half the story. Efficiency is what makes it sustainable. Thanks again for listening to Serious Talk Agentic AI. If you found this valuable, please follow or subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you can, leave us a quick review. It helps other leaders and builders find these resources. And here's a direct ask: share this episode with a business leader or engineering manager who's feeling the pressure of AI implementation, especially anyone who's seeing usage limits, unpredictable spend, or questions about scaling responsibly. We've included links and resources in the show notes. And if you have questions or want to talk through what token stewardship looks like in your environment, reach out to us at serioustalk@serioussolutions.com. The address will be in the show notes. And a special thank you goes out to Jason Fowler for allowing us to use his song, Mystery Road. Until next time, I'm Greg Banks.